The Revenge of the Wizard's Ghost by John Bellairs, Chapter 15. On a lovely warm Sunday in late May, Johnny and his friends were riding on one of the swan boats in the Boston Public Garden. The swan boats are long, shallow barges with rows of park benches on them. At the back of each is a large metal hollow swan, painted white, and inside of each one sits a park employee who makes the boat go by pumping pedals. The boats go around a long duck pond that is divided into two parts by an old stone bridge. As the man pumped the pedals, Grandma and Grandpa Dixon sat on the rear seat of one of the boats, munching popcorn and talking happily. In the row in front of them sat Professor Childermass, Professor Coote, Fergie, and Johnny. Johnny was pale, but color was beginning to come back into his cheeks. He had been out of the hospital for only a couple of weeks, and he was still a bit unsteady on his legs, but he was in a cheerful mood. At the moment he was eating a hot dog and listening to Professor Coote, who was explaining once again why the church on the Windrow estate had fallen down. "Okay, Professor," said Johnny as he threw a piece of hot dog bun to one of the ducks that were swimming around the boat. "I think I've got it straight, some of it anyway. The church fell down because the salt caves underneath collapsed, and they collapsed because water got in and dissolved the pillars of salt that held up the roof of the caves. But how did the water get into the caves?" Professor Coote smiled placidly. "The water got in through a channel in the rock of the riverbank. The Hudson River had been eating away at a weak place in the rock for years, and finally the river water began to seep into the caves. The whole shebang might have collapsed earlier this year, except for one thing. On the banks of the river at the bottom of the hill that the Windrow estate was on, there was a different kind of cave. It was just a narrow slit in the limestone, and its entrance was hidden by some bushes, but a team of explorers discovered it about a year ago. They were slithering in on their bellies, and guess what they found? Their cave connected with the underground river channel. I've done a drawing for you that will help explain the setup. Here, have a look." Professor Coote reached into his inside pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper with a pencil drawing on it. "The explorers made their way to the place where the channel entered the salt caves," Professor Coote went on. "And it didn't take them long to figure out there'd be a disaster if they didn't find some way to keep the river water out. So they went and reported their terrible discovery to the people who owned the estate, and—" "Wait a minute," said Professor Childermass, interrupting. "Wait just a teeny little minute. There's a staircase leading down from the crypt of the church to the salt caves, or rather there was a staircase before the church fell down. If people went down the stairs, wouldn't they have noticed that water was seeping into the caves?" Professor Coote smiled wryly. "Roderick," he said, "I'm glad you brought that up. It may come as a shock to you, but the staircase and the marble doorway never existed. I was looking through the Foundation's guidebook the other day, and it doesn't say anything about any staircase to the caves. Don't you think it would have mentioned a weird, unlikely detail like that? I would guess that the ghost of Zebulon Windrow put that doorway and those stairs there so you two could have a peek at those evil-haunted caves, but I'll say more about old Zeb in a minute." Okay, said Fergie impatiently. "So the cave explorers told the owners of the estate about the caves and the water seeping in. Did they panic? What happened to them?" "What happened? Well, the owners paid the explorers to go back and plug up the end of the channel with a little wall of stones and mortar. It was a tedious job, but they managed to do it, and the wall was right here, where I've drawn this little arrow on the map. Do you see it?" Johnny blinked and nodded. "Yeah, I understand. So did an earthquake knock down the wall? Is that what happened?" "Earthquake my eye," said Professor Childermass scornfully. "That's the official version. What really happened was this. Old Zebulon Windrow got up out of his grave and went down to smash the wall and let the water in. I know it sounds very unlikely, but I am convinced that that's what happened." Johnny's eyes grew wide. "Really?" Professor Coote sighed. "Yes, I'm afraid so. You see, right after the church collapsed, the estate's owners sent the explorers down into the cave again to see what they could figure out had happened. Well, when the explorers had made their way to the place where they had built the wall, they found something rather unpleasant. A big hole had been knocked in their wall, and lying near the wall was a skeleton dressed in the rotting remains of an old-fashioned suit. After digging through some old dental records, the estate's owners were able to say that the skeleton was Zeb Windrow's." He smiled sourly. "Zeb had been buried in the Lady Chapel at the eastern end of the church, and everyone assumed that the body had plummeted down into the caves along with all the other rubble. But after hearing Roderick's tale, I would have to agree with his conclusion. The skeleton was down there before the church collapsed, and it had gotten there under its own power. Remember the evil wind that knocked Fergie and Roderick over when they were climbing back up from the caves? That was old Zeb on his way down. Johnny gasped. On a bright sunny day in a crowded park, it was hard to believe in walking corpses. "Really?" he said again. "Are you sure, Professor?" "Reasonably," said Professor Coot, pursing up his lips and staring owlishly at Johnny. "Remember old Zebulon was the head of a clan of witches and wizards, and he was the one who owned the Urim and the Thummim, the magic objects that gave the Windrow family their powers. When he died, he never really died completely. His spirit hung around guarding the family treasure, and it had the power to make itself visible. Byron here saw Zebulon standing in the town square of Van Twiller one night, though he didn't realize that he was looking at a ghost. Later, when our two friends started poking around in the old church, old Zeb decided to make their search a tiny bit harder for them. He probably thought it'd be fun to have a church come down on their heads, just as they had found what they were looking for. Fun, said Professor Childermass bitterly. If I had the old creep here, I'd show him what fun was. I'd wring his skeletal neck, but in spite of everything, we did solve his insane puzzle, and we got away with the wonderful and exciting prize. By the way,